Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Charles. I want to welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamerspro Show, where we cover everything from sports, hot topics, classic debates, entertainment, where we give you guys a fresh perspective on things and how we see them. And in today's episode, the topic is defense the key to the Clippers winning the NBA title? So that's the topic I want to get into today's video. But before we get into that, I want you guys to please make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to be notified whenever we drop our content. Also, be on the lookout for our Dreamerspro premium community, and be on the lookout for Dreamerspro.com, which we're working on. Anyway, let me get into this topic. Here, I think is a pretty interesting one, right? We all know that the hype, one of the reasons the Clippers were so hyped last season or a year ago was because of their potential on the defensive end of the floor. Why? What was the big hoopla all about, right? The hype was surrounded around the fact that the Clippers now had a team that had Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Patrick Beverley on one team. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, these are exceptional all-NBA defensive type players, right? Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have made multiple all-first defensive teams. Kawhi Leonard has done it at least twice or three times. Paul George has done it at least twice, right? And these guys have made multiple, like, the defensive teams. Patrick Beverley has made multiple defensive teams as well. Also, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, both of them have led the league in steals. Both players have done that in their careers, right? And Kawhi Leonard has won 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards. And then you throw in a Marcus Morris, who they got at the trade deadline, who's a great defensive player. It's sort of like a hybrid small forward, power forward type player. He's also a great defensive player that can play great man-to-man defense, right? So with the addition of these players, everyone thought that this team was going to be a defensive stalwart. I mean, they were just going to be zealots on the defensive end of the floor. And at certain times in the season, you kind of saw that. But for most of the season last year, they were not a really great defensive team, right? And it was a bit perplexing because you're like, they have all of these great defensive players and they can switch pretty much on everything. But for some reason, teams were able to score on this team. And we were trying to understand, why was that, right? Now, one of the reasons that was one of the reasons that they weren't such a great defensive team was because of their front line. They didn't have stout defenders on their front line. Their front line was helmed by Montrezl Harrell and Zubac. Zubac is not a great defensive player. He's good, but he's not great. He's still learning. He's still a very young guy. I believe Zubac is 24 years old. He's still learning. He's still coming into his own, right? And Montrezl Harrell, although Montrezl Harrell played with a lot of force and a lot of energy and played with great tenacity, number one, he didn't have the size. At 6'7", you're not going to be an exceptional defender unless you're going to be like the next Dennis Rodman or something like that. You're just not going to be, especially when you're going against bigger players who are very, very skilled, like the Anthony Davises of the world, like the Nikola Jokic's of the world, like the Kristaps Porzingis of the world. You can't check these guys on the defensive end with these guys. And when the team was getting, picked apart, it was usually because of, great dribble penetration and ball movement. The minute they did that, and teams would find a gap in their offense, once they got past, their perimeter defenders, Kawhi Leonard and these guys, once they attacked the paint, there was usually no shot blocking or great athleticism at the rim, right? Montrezl Harrell was not a shot deterrent. He just wasn't. Zubac sometimes could be, but not really, and not at a consistent rate. That was one of the things that Nick Wright was talking about a lot of last season, is saying that this team wasn't good. It wasn't that they didn't have good individual defenders. They did, and players I mentioned before. It's just that when you beat those guys, right? Once you beat those guys and you now start going to the basket, they didn't have great rim protection. It wasn't like the Lakers. The Lakers, once you got past LeBron and these guys in the front line, and the Rondo and these guys, who did you have have back there defending the paint? Anthony Davis, who's an all-world defender, who could have possibly been the Defensive Player of the Year award. I think he probably should have won the Defensive Player of the Year award, Defensive Player of the Year award last season. You had Dwight Howard, who was a multiple-time defender, and you had JaVale McGee. That was a lot of length and great defensive players and athleticism at the rim that other teams didn't have. The Clippers didn't dream of having that. And once they went up against a team or teams that had great ball movement and player movement, they had great dribble penetration, it was over. You can just score on them, in perpetuity, pretty much, right? So they weren't very good on the defensive end of the floor. This season, however, they tried to address that. Number one, they went and got a shot deterrent in Serge Ibaka, who has led the league in blocks, I think 3 times in his career, 2 or 3 times, number one. Number two, he is a good defender. He's a serviceable big, even up into the stage of his career at 31 years old. He can still play great defense, but not for 48 minutes at a time, but he can play great defense at stretches of the game. But when they take him out of the game, there's still a drop-off with Zubac, I believe. I don't believe Zubac is such a great defender. Now, this season, the Clippers on the defensive side of the ball, they're allowing 108.6 points per game. In my opinion, that's too high. They're scoring about 115, which is fine because they can score with any team out there, literally. But on the defensive side of the ball, they're giving up way too many points. Literally, way too many points. That's too high. That number should be between 100 and 104. If you can hold teams in this particular NBA around 100 points per game, you are a very good defensive team. If you can hold them below 100, man, you're exceptional, right? You're exceptional given the amount of threes that teams are shooting right now. But I think that number should be closer to, it should be between 104, 101. I mean, 101, that region. 108, 109 is way too high. Now, it was higher before, and it's been coming down. Thus far, the Lakers are a better defensive team than the Clippers if you're just going by the raw stats, right? I think it's hilarious when you listen to these guys talk about defensive efficiency and defensive rating, and meanwhile, that team is giving up like 115, 110 points. But how can you be a great defensive team and you're giving up 120 points a game? I don't care what defensive rating and the defensive efficiency, whatever that. I think a lot of those stats are just guys. Some people need jobs in the NBA, and they came up with these stats. And now this is, I think John Hollinger was one of the guys that came up with a lot of these advanced analytics, right? And then you see teams still suck, right? You see the Houston Rockets; they had more analytics than I don't know, a government building or something, or whatever it was, and the Houston Rockets never won. Yet Daryl Morey and these guys are so smart, yet they never won, right? Guys are walking around beating their chest, talking about analytics, but it never amounts to anything. You need to be a good defensive team, plain and simple. Don't allow a lot of points. Don't allow teams to score a lot of points on you and outscore them. It's not. We don't need to go to we don't need to go like to an NBA academy to understand these things. But somehow guys like to make it seem like it's more, more complicated than it needs to be. Traditional stats work just fine. I think some people need to feel the need to make things sound complicated to feel smart. You don't need to be a genius to understand these things, right? It's very simple. If a team is giving up too many points per game, they're not a good defensive team. You want to talk about defensive win shares and all of this. As I said, whatever, right? At one point, they made up a stat talking about deflections. This guy got the most deflections this season, and therefore he's like James Harden is a great deflections, and James Harden's defense is improving. But the guy never even made an all-defensive team, right? So what are we talking about here? What are we talking about? But anyway, the Clippers on the offensive side of the ball have been great, right? Right now, they're top 5 in field goal percentage, top number 1 in three-point percentage, and top number 1 in free throw percentage. So on the offensive side of the ball, they're doing amazingly well, and but their defense needs to catch up to their offense. And hopefully, with the more games that they play, they start to become a much better team on the defensive end of the floor, right? And also, what helps your defense is shot making. If you make shots, which the Clippers can do at a very high rate, it helps your defense because now, once you make a shot, it allows your guys to get back on defense and set your defense. But if you're not a very good shooting team, you get into this up and down game. It's going to be very hard to set your defense, and teams can score on you easily, in the transition game. And that's why shooting is very important. But nevertheless, in the half court, the Clippers need to be able to play much better defense, and they need to get their opponent's scoring percentage down. I think it's too high. 108 is way too high, and that's one of the reasons why. Although 108 is too high, the New Jersey Nets are giving up way more, and this is one of the reasons why I still think the Lakers and the Clippers are better than the Nets. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes I wonder, yesterday I was listening to Stephen A. Smith on ESPN, I believe it was First Take. And I'm just surprised for somebody that's been in that business for well over 3 decades, or well over 2 decades, right? I'm just surprised at some of the superficial analysis that Stephen A. Smith has been giving. I'm surprised by it. Right? It's very man on the street type of analysis that he's giving. Basically, analysis that any casual fan can give. They ask him, okay, what do you expect from the New Jersey Nets? Oh, I expect them to be in the finals. Why? Did you see how many points KD is scoring? I mean, what kind of analysis is that? What are people supposed to learn from that type of analysis? Nothing. Who doesn't know that Kevin Durant can score at a high rate or James Harden can score at a high rate? I mean, who doesn't know that? We didn't need you to tell us that, right? Instead, he doesn't go deep into his reasoning why he says that. I think a lot of it is just hype and excitement. It's going to, but the guys don't play good defense. Yeah, but nobody talks about, so why? I mean, you're getting paid millions and millions of dollars a year to come on TV and give me some type of bland, watered down, superficial explanation of why you think this team is going to win. Listen, the Lakers and the Clippers are better than the Nets. Okay? They're better than the Nets, and I'll say it again. Why? Because the Lakers and the Clippers can score with the Nets. They can score. The Lakers and Clippers are top 5 in offense, if I'm not mistaken. If I go and check it here, let me just make sure I can make sure this is correct. Okay. The Brooklyn Nets are the number 1 team in the NBA in field goal percentage. Guess who's the number 2 and number 3? Lakers and the Clippers. So what does that tell you? The Lakers and the Clippers can play fantastic. They're very great on the offensive end of the floor. And that also has to do with the fact that the Brooklyn Nets just recently played. So those numbers are going to be skewed towards them, and the Lakers have to play as well, right? But, however, the Clippers, on the other hand, are the number 1 3-point shooting team in the league. So that means the Clippers can shoot right up there with the Brooklyn Nets, right? But if we look on the defensive end of the ball, you're not going to find the Brooklyn Nets there. The Clippers and the Lakers are better than the Brooklyn Nets. So why am I bringing all of this up? What I'm basically saying is the Clippers can guard players, right, and score. The Nets can score, but they can't guard anybody. So who has a better chance at winning a series? If you're just looking at the offensive side of the ball, then you're going to overlook the fact that the Lakers can score too. Let me ask you, if we were supposed to see a Lakers and Nets matchup in the finals, Stephen A. Smith would tell you, KD shooting 50% from the field and blah, 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 blah. James Harden shooting. We've understood that. Basically what you're saying in a nutshell is these guys can score and they're going to be very hard to stop on the offensive end. We understand that. Now, help me understand. Who on the Nets is supposed to be able to pick up LeBron? KD can't play LeBron James. He can't guard him. LeBron is too physical for him. First of all, he's too heavy. If LeBron drops his shoulder and puts it into KD, he's clearing him out of the way. LeBron is almost as tall. LeBron is 6'9". KD's, I think, is 6'10". LeBron is a much heavier guy, right? He's a heavier body. If he puts his shoulder into you, he's going to knock you out of the way. He did it his entire career. It's not all of a sudden going to change. There's nobody on the Brooklyn Nets that can stop LeBron James consistently from getting to the basket. Number 1. Number 2, who in the hell is going to guard Anthony Davis? You already traded away Jarrett Allen. Now, some people say, well, you can trade bucket for bucket. My friend, it's quite different. Why? Because with AD, right? AD, the thing that makes the Lakers hard is that you can dump the ball into him in the post. And what does it mean when you drop the ball into the post? Number 1, it means that by dropping the ball in the post, you can slow down the pace of the game. While the other team is running, you can throw the ball in the post and slow down the pace of the game. Once you slow down the pace of the game, if the Lakers can control the pace of the game, and LeBron James is the best player at controlling the pace of the game, because LeBron takes over LeBron can run an entire game, your side and his side. If you can't contend with that, you're talking about, these guys, they're going to score, but the Lakers are going to score too, and they're going to score in a myriad of ways, number 1. Number 2, what happens when you stop making those shots from the perimeter? LeBron James is not primarily a 3-point shooter. We've seen James Harden go cold in the playoffs before, right? We've seen that. LeBron, at worst case, you just put his head down and get to the basket. So the Lakers are better than the Nets, just for the simple fact that they play defense, but for whatever reason, people don't pay any attention to defense. I don't know why. Clippers have better defensive players. If your goal is, okay, you know what? Let's get into a shooting match. All right. Paul George can score with the best of them. Literally, go look at his numbers. if we're going to go into a shoot-a-thon, Kawhi Leonard is going to abuse Kawhi Leonard is going to abuse these guys. He's a heavier guy. He's going to abuse these guys. So for me, people, if you're just going to look at the offensive side of the game, then you have an argument. But if you don't look at defense, you're missing half of the equation, and you can't do that. I've just been surprised that Stephen A. Smith goes on TV and gives these kind of bland analysis, but that's just me. I went off a bit. But anyway, all I'm saying is the Clippers need to take a next step. And if they take a next step on the defensive end of the floor, I believe they're going to be a championship favorite. So what I want to know from you guys is, do you agree with me? Do you believe that defense is the key to the Clippers winning the title? Or do you think that even if they're a great defensive team, they're not going to lose? They're going to lose. Whatever you guys think, please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Again, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to be notified whenever we drop our content. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the next video that we have coming up. Once again, it's Charles here from Dreamerspro, wishing you guys an amazing day. Catch you guys on the next episode. Peace.